In the autumn of 1954, two police officers arrived at a house on Ashlin Street in Greenfield, Ohio. They had received a call from a woman who said she had seen something disturbing in her neighbor's home. The woman had asked to remain anonymous. She said she was afraid. The officers drove to the address she had provided. It was a small two-story house at the end of a quiet block. The paint was peeling, the grass needed cutting, the curtains were drawn. One officer knocked on the door. A man answered. He asked what the problem was. The officer said they had received a report and needed to come inside. The man hesitated. Then he stepped aside. The house was located in a working-class neighborhood on the edge of town. Most of the residents had lived there for years. They knew each other by name. They helped with repairs. They borrowed tools. They watched each other's children. The house on Ashlin Street was different. The people who lived there kept to themselves. They did not participate in neighborhood events. They did not socialize. They were polite when spoken to, but they did not invite conversation. Over time, the neighbors stopped trying. The house had been purchased in 1949 by a man named Raymond Cutter. He was 36 years old. He worked at a warehouse on the north side of town. He loaded trucks. He kept regular hours. He did not speak much to his co-workers. His supervisor described him as reliable but cold. Raymond lived in the house with a woman named Vera. They were not married, though they referred to each other as husband and wife. Vera was 32 years old. She did not work. She was rarely seen outside the house. When she did leave, it was to buy groceries or run errands. She did not linger. She did not make eye contact. Neighbors later stated that they had heard sounds coming from the house at night. One man who lived across the street said he heard shouting on several occasions between 1951 and 1953. He said it sounded like a man and a woman arguing. He said the shouting would stop abruptly. Another neighbor, a woman named Lillian Boyd, said she had heard banging sounds late at night. She said it sounded like furniture being moved. She said it would go on for hours. She said she assumed they were rearranging rooms. She said she never asked about it. A few neighbors had been inside the house. A mailman named Frank Osborne said he had delivered a package to the door in 1950. Raymond Cutter had invited him inside to sign for it. Frank said the living room was sparsely furnished. He said there was a couch, a chair, and a small table. He said the walls were bare. He said it was very clean. He said Raymond had thanked him and closed the door quickly. Frank said he had glanced toward the staircase. He said there was a door at the top of the stairs. He said the door had a heavy lock on the outside. He said he thought it was unusual but did not mention it. Another neighbor, a woman named Evelyn Marsh, said she had stopped by the house in 1952 to ask if Raymond could help her husband fix a fence. She said Raymond had answered the door but had not invited her in. She said Vera had appeared behind him. She said Vera looked pale and tired. Evelyn said she asked if everything was all right. Vera said yes. Raymond said they were busy. Evelyn left. She said she felt uncomfortable but could not explain why. On several occasions, neighbors reported seeing people approach the house and enter. These individuals were not regulars. They did not live on the street. One neighbor said he saw a young man walk up to the house in 1951. The man was carrying a small bag. He knocked on the door. Raymond opened it. The young man went inside. The neighbor said he did not see the young man leave. Another neighbor said she saw a woman in her 20s arrive at the house in 1953. The woman looked nervous. She went inside. The neighbor said she never saw the woman again. She said she assumed the woman had left through the Ishidi back door. In the spring of 1954, A couple named Arthur and Helen Grant moved into the house next door. They were in their late 20s. They had no children. Arthur worked as a mechanic. Helen worked part-time at a pharmacy. They were friendly. They introduced themselves to the neighbors. They waved to Raymond and Vera when they saw them. Raymond and Vera did not wave back. Helen Grant later stated that she had tried to befriend Vera. She said she had knocked on the door one afternoon in June and offered Vera some baked goods. Vera had accepted them but had not invited Helen inside. Helen said she asked if Vera wanted to have coffee sometime. Vera said she was very busy. Helen said she understood. She said Vera looked afraid. She said she did not know why. Arthur Grant said he had noticed a smell coming from the Cutter house in late summer. He said it was faint but unpleasant. He said it reminded him of spoiled meat. He said he mentioned it to Raymond one evening when they were both outside. Raymond said they had a problem with the plumbing. Arthur offered to help. Raymond said it was being taken care of. Arthur said Raymond walked back into the house and closed the door. On the night of October 12th, 1954, Arthur and Helen Grant were sitting in their living room. It was after 10 o'clock. They heard sounds coming from the Cutter house. Arthur said it sounded like someone crying. Helen said it sounded like someone asking for help. The sounds were muffled. They came from the upper floor. Arthur said he went outside and stood in his yard. He said he could hear the sounds more clearly. He said it was definitely a voice. He said it was a woman's voice. Helen joined him. She said they should call the police. Arthur said they should make sure first. He said he did not want to cause trouble if it was nothing. Arthur walked to the Cutter house and knocked on the door. No one answered. He knocked again. The sounds upstairs stopped. Raymond opened the door. Arthur asked if everything was all right. Raymond said everything was fine. Arthur said he had heard something. Raymond said the radio had been on. Arthur said it did not sound like a radio. Raymond said it was. Arthur said he wanted to make sure. Raymond began to close the door. Arthur stepped forward. He said he needed to check. Raymond told him to leave. Arthur did not leave. Helen Grant had gone back inside their house. She called the police. She told the operator she believed something was wrong next door. She said she had heard someone calling for help. She said the neighbor was acting strangely. The operator said officers would be sent. Helen went back outside. Arthur was standing at the Cutter door. Raymond was blocking the entrance. Helen said the police were coming. Raymond stared at her. He said nothing. He stepped back inside and closed the door. Arthur and Helen waited in their yard. Approximately 15 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. Arthur explained what they had heard. The officers approached the house and knocked. Raymond answered. The officers asked if they could come inside. Raymond asked why. The officers said they had received a report of a disturbance. Raymond said there was no disturbance. One of the officers asked again. Raymond hesitated. Then he stepped aside. The officers entered the living room. Vera was sitting on the couch. She did not look at them. One officer asked if anyone else was in the house. Raymond said no. The officer asked if they could look around. Raymond said they could not. The officer said they had reason to believe someone might be in distress. Raymond said they were mistaken. The officer said they were going to search the house. Raymond did not respond. One officer remained with Raymond and Vera in the living room. The other officer went upstairs. At the top of the stairs, he found a door. The door had a heavy bolt lock on the outside. The bolt was engaged. The officer called down to his partner. He said the door was locked from the outside. He asked Raymond for the key. Raymond said there was no key. The officer said he was going to force the door open. Raymond did not object. The officer forced the lock. The door opened. The smell was immediate. The officer stepped back. He covered his nose and mouth. He called for his partner. The second officer came upstairs. Both officers entered the room. The room was approximately 12 feet by 10 feet. There were no windows. The walls were covered with soundproofing material. The floor was wood. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was a chair. The chair was bolted to the floor. There were restraints attached to the arms and legs of the chair. The restraints were leather. They showed signs of use. Against one wall was a table. On the table were tools, knives, pliers, a hammer, a saw. The tools were clean but stained. Next to the table was a metal cabinet. The officers opened the cabinet. Inside were jars. The jars contained liquid and what appeared to be organic material. The officers did not examine the contents closely. In the corner of the room was a mattress. On the mattress was a woman. She was alive. She was restrained with rope. Her mouth was gagged. She was weak. She could barely move. The officers removed the gag and the restraints. The woman began to cry. She said she did not know where she was. She said she had been there for days. She said she did not remember how she had gotten there. One officer stayed with her. The other went downstairs. The officer told his partner to call for an ambulance and additional units. He placed Raymond and Vera Cutter under arrest. Neither resisted. Vera began to cry quietly. Raymond stared at the floor. He said nothing. The woman found in the room was taken to the hospital. She was treated for dehydration, malnutrition, and injuries consistent with prolonged restraint and physical trauma. She was identified as Margaret Ennis, age 27. She had been reported missing 2 weeks earlier. She had last been seen leaving a diner in downtown Greenfield. She told investigators that she had been approached by a woman who asked if she needed a ride. Margaret said yes. The woman drove her to a house. Margaret said she went inside. She said a man was waiting. She said she was struck from behind. She said she woke up in the room upstairs. She said she was kept there. She said she was given water but very little food. She said she was restrained most of the time. She said the man and the woman came into the room several times. She said they hurt her. She did not provide further details. The house was searched extensively. In the locked room, investigators found additional evidence. Beneath the floorboards, they found bones. The bones were human. They belonged to at least 3 individuals. The bones showed signs of trauma. Some had been cut. Some had been broken. The condition of the bones suggested they had been there for several years. Means the kitchen. Investigators found a large freezer. Inside the freezer were packages wrapped in brown paper. The packages were labeled with dates. The contents of the packages were later identified as human tissue. In the pantry, they found jars similar to those in the locked room. The jars were labeled. Some contained preserved organs, others contained unidentifiable material. Raymond and Vera Cutter were taken to the county jail and questioned separately. Raymond was calm. He answered questions directly. He confirmed that the locked room was his. He said he had built it in 1950. He said he had soundproofed it himself. He said he had used it for his work. When asked what his work was, he said it was private. When asked how many people had been in the room, he said he did not keep count. When asked what had happened to them, he said they had been used. When asked to clarify, he did not respond. Vera Cutter was less composed. She cried throughout the interview. She said Raymond had made her help. She said she had been afraid of him. She said he had threatened her. When asked what she had done, she said she had brought people to the house. She said she had prepared the room. She said she had helped clean. When asked if she had participated in harming the victims, she said Raymond had made her. She said she had not wanted to. She said she had no choice. Investigators asked both Raymond and Vera about the packages in the freezer. Raymond said they were for consumption. He said he and Vera had eaten them. He said it had started as curiosity. He said it had become routine. Vera confirmed this. She said Raymond had insisted. She said she had refused at first. She said he had forced her. She said eventually she had stopped refusing. Over the course of the investigation, evidence of at least 5 victims was recovered. Margaret Ennis was the only survivor. The remains found beneath the floorboards belonged to 3 individuals. One was identified as a woman named Sharon Pitts, age 24, who had been reported missing in 1951. Another was identified as a man named Donald Wells, age 29, who had disappeared in 1952. The third victim was never identified. The tissue in the freezer was analyzed. It was determined to belong to at least 2 additional individuals. One was later identified as a young man named Carl Jensen, age 22, who had vanished in 1953. The other was never identified. Investigators believed there may have been additional victims whose remains were not recovered. Raymond Cutter was charged with 5 counts of murder and 1 count of kidnapping. Vera Cutter was charged as an accessory to murder and with kidnapping. Both pleaded guilty. Raymond showed no emotion during the proceedings. Vera cried. Neither provided a motive, neither expressed remorse. Raymond Cutter was sentenced to death. Vera Cutter was sentenced to life in prison. Raymond was executed in 1956. He declined to make a final statement. Vera remained in prison until her death in 1982. She rarely spoke to other inmates. She participated in no activities. She received no visitors. The house on Ashlin Street was demolished in 1955. The lot remained vacant for years. It was eventually sold and a small park was built on the site. The park has no plaque or marker. Most residents of Greenfield do not know its history. Margaret Ennis recovered physically from her injuries. She moved away from Ohio shortly after the trial. She did not speak publicly about what had happened. She requested privacy. That request was honored. The 3 unidentified victims were buried in unmarked graves. Their names are still unknown. The case was officially closed in 1956. In the years following the arrest, neighbors spoke to reporters. Most expressed shock. One woman said she had always thought Raymond and Vera were odd, but not dangerous. She said she wished she had paid more attention. Another neighbor said he had heard the sounds at night, but had assumed they were harmless. He said he regretted not investigating. Arthur and Helen Grant moved away from Ashland Street in 1955. Arthur later said he could not forget the sounds he had heard. He said he was grateful they had acted. He said he wondered how long it had been going on before they arrived. The case files are stored in the county archives. Photographs and evidence from the investigation are restricted. Access requires special permission. Few requests have been made. At least 5 people died in that house between 1950 and 1954. 3 of them are still unidentified. 1 woman survived. A neighborhood existed around that house for years. People lived next door. They heard sounds. They saw strangers enter. They did not ask questions. The case is closed. The questions remain.